Hey everybody, Paul Mack here. I've got another viewer question from Old Dog Dreaming 5715. He says, "Good morning, Paul Mack. I believe there would be a lot of folks interested in processing a hog your way. I watch a lot of the old ways they process their own meat just to see the different ways folks do it. Fred and family." Well, as you can see, homesteaders who decide to breed and raise their own hogs for a continuing supply of piglets for a continuing supply of pork soon find out that hogs are prolific. They're a lot like rabbits. They multiply like crazy. The thought of butchering 5, 6, 8 hogs, even for a large family, is a lot of work, and it's just probably too much pork. So what is one to do? Rather than waiting till wintertime, like is traditional to butcher several big hogs, I butcher smaller pigs as they grow so that I'm not overwhelmed at wintertime, cold weather, freezing time, when it comes time to butcher and scald hogs. I'm not overwhelmed with a whole bunch of hogs that we have to butcher all at once. Here's how it works. This is a litter of pigs. A couple of months or so after farrowing, a few pigs are chosen for slaughter. There's not nearly as much pork as you would have, obviously, on a larger hog, but there's enough pork in those pigs to provide several meals for a couple of months. A couple of months down the road beyond that, you butcher 3 more pigs. They're a little bit bigger, a little more pork. Then, a couple more months down the road, after you've consumed that amount of pork, a couple more pigs are chosen. Another couple of months down the road, maybe you butcher one of them. And that leaves you 2 pigs left that you can continue growing throughout the year until freezing weather when they're rather mature, and you'll get more meat from them and you can slaughter them the traditional way. The traditional way would be to kill, bleed, scald, scrape the hair off, hang, gut, half, and then make your cuts the next day or whatever. There's an easier way to go about butchering these and processing these smaller hogs or pigs, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. You've got them killed, you've got them bled out, you're ready for butchering. How does it begin? The process begins for me with washing the pigs off. I'll take a wash tub or a half a blue barrel, fill it with water and a little bit of laundry detergent, and that's what I'll wash the pigs off with. You get all the mud and the blood off of them, all the dirt, and it just cleans them up really nice. And actually it makes the whole process of butchering, which, it has odors attached to it, not all together pleasant usually, but that detergent makes the whole process smell just a little bit better, and everything nice and clean, keeps everything as clean as possible, which is important when you're slaughtering. So I'll wash them off first, and then once I rinse them, I'll put the pig up on an elevated surface like an outdoor table or a tailgate of a truck. That's what I normally use. Get them up on the tailgate of the truck. And the first thing I do is I set the pig on its haunches, kind of upright with the back to the top there, and using a sharp knife or a gut hook from the crown of the head, I'll make a cut there and insert the gut hook, and from the crown of the head all the way down to the base of the tail, I'll make a long incision, not cutting deep, but just cutting the skin from the crown of the head down to the base of the tail. You got to keep your gut hook or your knife pretty sharp for this whole thing. You want to start with sharp knives and butcher knives that you're using. For the older pigs, the older hogs, that skin can be very tough, especially right there where the old razorback is. So the younger pigs, I've noticed the skin is a lot easier to slice like that. Now once that initial cut is made, I'll usually lay the pig over on its side, and I'll make 2 more cuts in the skin. One of them from the withers or the shoulder, top of the shoulder, from where the original cut is, I'll do a perpendicular cut down right along the middle of the shoulder all the way down to that first joint, to just below that first joint of the leg or so. And then the next cut is over from the top of the hip, where that original cut is, another perpendicular cut down the middle of the hip or the ham there down to just past the first joint of the leg right there. At that point, I'll take my knife and make a circle cut. Wherever you're going to cut the foot off, I'll make a circle cut around that foot. Just make sure I'm not trying to go deep, and you can't really go deep on the legs because there's not a lot of flesh there. I'm just trying to cut the skin all the way around the foot in a circle that meets the original cut. Now we can start skinning the pig on this first side. And I start up at the top on either corner, usually about the shoulder, and I will start very, very tenderly peeling the skin back with my very, very sharp knife. And the whole point here is I'm trying to keep as much fat attached to the carcass and as little fat as possible attached to the skin as I'm peeling it back. Now that's hard to do with those young pigs because the young pigs don't have near as much fat as they would have when they got older. Sometimes the older pigs may have a little more fat, especially if you're feeding them a generous amount of corn or whatever. But the young ones, it's hard to keep a lot of fat on there because there's not just a whole lot of fat. Now what I'm trying to do on this first cut on the shoulder is peel away enough of that skin on both sides of that incision that goes down the shoulder. I'm trying to peel away enough skin that I can get at the whole shoulder and the leg and be able to pull it upwards. So I just keep skinning away until I reveal more and more of the shoulder. I'm also trying to free the skin away from the leg to that first joint where I made the circle cut. I need to free that skin away off that leg so that I can cut that foot off. And that's probably one of the first things you can do while the shoulder is still attached to the carcass is go ahead and once you get the skin off the foot, make a cut and cut that foot off. With smaller pigs, I've found that it's easy to use just regular old branch cutters that I would be trimming limbs with or whatever. These are really good they're going to be good for snipping through the ribs later, but especially on pigs, and you can get away with a little bit bigger pig and a small hog. It depends. You may have to use a bone saw or a hand saw or something for larger hogs that have bigger legs, but for the pigs you can get away with using the branch cutters to snip those legs. It's kind of strange, but on the shoulder you end up cutting through meat and pretty soft tissue. You really don't even have to cut through a bone to get that shoulder off. You just keep carving until the shoulder is free. It makes you wonder how that thing is attached so well. So now you've got the shoulder free. The next thing I do is I turn my attention down to the ham, and I begin doing the same thing. I'm freeing the skin down that incision, pulling the skin back, working it back so that I can get at that ham. I do the same thing. I take the skin all the way down and remove it from around that circle cut I made on the back leg there so that everything is pretty much free. Near the tail area, I'm trying to free as much skin as possible because there's a lot of good flesh there at the back part of that ham there. After the skin is pulled away from the ham, you can take your branch cutters again and snip that leg off. And then to free the ham from the carcass, it's a little bit trickier than the shoulder. A ham their back leg is a much more complex structure. So there's a few more bones that you have to work around and free. One of them is like a finger-shaped bone that's up kind of toward the front of the ham, up at the top. You have to kind of carve around it. Do the best you can to make it look nice and neat and keep as much of the flesh on the actual cut you're going to use as possible. Now, you're also, just like with the shoulder, you're going to pull the back leg and the ham upward and begin cutting underneath, but you're going to run into the hip socket there, and the hip socket is it's kind of a ball that's in there attached to the ham bone, but you keep lifting up and you're just going to have to keep cutting around it until that ball slips out of its socket. Sometimes it does it easily by hand, sometimes you have to do some cutting around it to get it to free up. But once you get the ham freed from the carcass, I usually take the old branch cutters there and I go ahead and cut that ball. The ball stays attached to the ham, and I usually go ahead and cut that little ball off. You're not going to need it for anything, and if you're trying to preserve the ham later through a traditional means like salting it and then curing it, and you're going to end up preserving it at room temperature, you don't want that ball on there anyway because it's full of stuff, and that stuff's going to rot. There's no way to get salt. Well, I guess you can drill into it. It's a lot of trouble. Just cut the ball joint off. You're not going to need it, and it makes life easier. So now we've got a shoulder free, we've got a ham free. I usually just put them to the side. If it's, you know, hot temperatures throughout the summer, you might have a clean plastic garbage, clean one, a clean plastic garbage bag handy so that she can just kind of put the meat in there and keep the flies off of it. Or in an ice chest, that's probably even better, an ice chest with some ice in it. Just drop your cuts in that. By the way, as you're doing this, you're going to find that it's almost impossible to keep the little hairs, you know, because when you're making cuts, sometimes you're cutting the hair. I try to keep a garden hose handy, and you can take a lot of hair off just by a lot of pressure, spraying the cuts with that hose and working those hairs off. But usually in the processing part, the next day when I'm cutting up some of those cuts, that's when I'll be very detailed about getting the hairs off, just incidentally. All right, so back to our cut. We've got the shoulder off, we've got the ham off. Then comes kind of a fun part. It's taking that long, beautiful strap of meat off, called the back strap, or some people call it the tenderloin. It's actually one of the best cuts on the whole hog or pig because it's this muscle, actually a couple of muscles that run either side of the spine back there. And, you know, it's not like that muscle gets as much work as the hams or the shoulders do when the pig is running around. So that is a very fine cut of meat. Normally, it's what you see when you buy a pork chop, except with pork chops, a hog is, you know, slaughtered the traditional way. You're going to have it in half, and then you're going to, if you're using a knife or a cleaver, you're going to go down between each rib, and each one of those cuts is a pork chop, and it has a cross section of this long tenderloin in it. That's what your pork chop is. But we're just going to take, on this method, we're just going to remove that whole long tender chunk of meat. And here's how you do it. You take your knife and you go along the backbone. You can start at the front or the back, either one, and you can run your knife until it touches I guess it's the vertebrae of the backbone. You can run your knife along that spine, going as deep as possible. Of course, you're going to run into the top of the ribs or the back of the ribs there, but you run that knife down as far as possible, all the way down. And then I usually go back and run it one more time just so that I get a little bit deeper all the way down. And once you've done that, you can go make an undercut kind of from underneath, and you're cutting back up to that original cut you made. You're still going back up toward the spine, but this cut actually frees that long tenderloin away from the spine. And so there you've got it. One long, hopefully long, depends on how big your pig is. If it's smaller pigs, your tenderloin might be, you know, about that long, that big around, something like that. All right, so shoulders removed, hams removed, tenderloin, one back strap is removed. Now we're going to turn our attention to the ribs. Now, on smaller pigs, it may or may not be worth it to pull that rib off there. I find on the smaller pigs, they have very little meat there in the ribs and very little fat. But on the bigger pigs, it tends to be quite worth it, especially if they've gotten a little more fat on them. Now what you do to free the ribs up is I'll take my fingers and I'll feel along the ribs on the side of the carcass there. I'll feel where the end of the ribs are, and with very, very light pressure, I'll take my knife and begin cutting just outside of where the tips of those ribs are. And I don't want to cut deep because I don't want to get into the gut sac. But one of the neat things about slaughtering hogs or pigs this way is that you don't ever have to open up the gut sac. You don't ever have to get to where the entrails are. They're left inside there, and it keeps the whole operation very, very clean and a lot easier. So finding those ribs, you make that cut along the very tip of the ribs, and you begin kind of working your fingers underneath and freeing the tips of those ribs as they move upward. And then, with the branch cutters, you'll locate the rib farthest away from the shoulder and cut it as close to the spine as possible. What I do is I'll take my branch cutter and I'll get the little hook part there underneath that rib, and I'll just cut it too, as close to the spine as possible. And then I'll go to the very next one, cut it, next one, cut it, next one, cut it. I can't remember how many ribs there are. There's a few of them. So you just keep cutting, and you're working your way back toward the head. When you get about as far as you can go, then you can continue lifting the rib up. You're trying to free it from the rest of the carcass there. And then I go to the bottom, I guess the bottom of the hog, and begin cutting the ribs that are more near the bottom of the chest area. The sternum, do hogs have a sternum? I guess it's a sternum. You know, where the kind of where the ribs meet. You're going to cut through those ribs and work your way back up to kind of to the direction you were going the other time. Pretty soon you've got 1 or 2 bones left, and you work the branch cutter under that until you've freed all the bones that keep the rib intact. And then at that point, all you've got is just little tender tissues left to cut with a butcher knife, and you can lift that whole rib off of the carcass. And there you've got a nice clean rib. So remember, for all these cuts, the shoulder, the ham, the tenderloin, and the ribs, I try to keep as much fat on those cuts as possible, especially if you're going to be grilling, because it's that fat that keeps the meat moist and adds that flavor to it. Again, on the younger pigs, it's hard to find a lot of fat on those ribs. And as far as the bacon goes, you know, on the pigs, even if they had enough fat, it would be, you know, your bacon would be, people would laugh at you. It's almost not even worth doing. So until the pig gets bigger. So really all you're looking at is the ribs and trying to keep as much fat on the ribs as possible. Okay, you've done one side of the hog. You've taken a shoulder off, a ham off, tenderloin, a rib. What do you do now? Well, it's pretty simple. You flip the hog over and you do all that again on the other side, which gains you another shoulder, another ham, another tenderloin, and another rib. Now for me, some of the advantages to butchering smaller hogs and pigs this way, for one thing, as I've already said, you don't have to scald and scrape and go to all that trouble. You don't have to bother with hanging the carcass up, and you don't have to bother with opening up the gut sac and dealing with all the internal organs. Unless, when you get through, you know, you need some liver for catfishing, and then you can go ahead and go in there and lift that open and cut some liver out and, you know, throw it in a bag and throw it in the freezer for when you go catfishing. And you might say, well, aren't you wasting some of the meat? Perhaps. I mean, there's the feet we didn't do anything with. We didn't do anything with the head. You could, if you wanted to, go ahead and skin the feet off or scald them, you know, just the feet alone, scrape them. If you really want feet that bad, you're not going to get a lot of meat off them because, again, they're small. So it almost is a point of, is it really worth it? Now, if there's a lot of fat on them, you could take the jowl off of either cheek. That's some good, it's got a little bit of lean in there. It's almost like bacon, but again, it's a small pig. It may not even be worth it until they're bigger. That is an option. And for those of you hardcore pork eaters, you could remove the brains. I personally like them. They are great in scrambled eggs. So, Duncan, SH81, and Old Dog Dreaming, thank you for sending in your questions. I hope that helps. If you have a question about today's topic, or maybe a comment that you'd like to add that helps these folks out, feel free. Please leave it in the comment section below. We'd all love to read about that. By the way, later on, we're going to go into some of the more, what you do the next day with the cuts that you have, the possibilities. You got a shoulder, you got a ham, you got a tenderloin, you got some ribs. Now what do you do with them? How do you process them, put them in the freezer, put them up, cut them up? We're going to talk about all that next time, so I hope you're here for that. If you're interested, I think you might enjoy my other videos on hog raising. I've got more detailed videos on how I actually keep the hogs here. I use electric fence. You'll see my electric fence system. Also, my method for training pigs to an electric fence so that they don't ever challenge it. Just watch my hog playlist. I'll have it in the link at the end here so that you can see that. Also, I want to remind you, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what we're doing. I'm Paul Mack, and next time I'll talk at you later about more pig butchering. Take care. W.S. Canlin 424, Farmhand's Companion. I thought I had watched them all, but apparently I've got some catching up to do. Well, we'll just sit right here until you get caught up.